As you can see, we're transitioning to be back to in-person meetings as much as possible, and still trying to have a bit of a hybrid system. So I'd like to say thank you very much to our IT team for all of their hard work in trying to get this happening, and it has been a very, very busy period for them with a lot of change. So thank you for your patience. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We do not have any apologies. All members are accounted for this evening. Item 3, public question time and receiving of public statements. I note that we have received some public questions in writing, so I'll go to the Manager of Governance to read those questions.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've received some questions from Dudley Meyer of Highgate. First question relates to item 7.3, Leederville Gardens Trust money. At the 30th of March meeting of Council, I asked if funds from the Leederville Gardens Trust Fund will be limited to projects within the city. The response stated that the EOI specifies that the funds are being made available for the provision of relief and support of residents, including homeless residents within the municipality of Vincent. Further, clause 1 of item 7.3 refers to the provisions of urgent relief to people in the city of Vincent. I take these to mean that the funds can only be spent on residents within Vincent, including homeless residents. The following questions. 1, given the response to my previous question, what steps have the administration put in place to ensure that the funds given to Food Bank will only be spent on Vincent residents? Question 2, what steps have the administration put in place to ensure that the funds shown in attachment 1 will only be spent on residents of the city of Vincent? Question 3, will the community have access to the acquittal reports of all funds identified in attachment 1? If not, why not? Question 4, on 28th of April, the committee approved $20,000 to be distributed to eligible seniors, people in hardship and the vulnerable, without clearly identifying what the criteria are for this group or groups. Given that the distribution of these funds have been delegated to a third party, People Who Care, what criteria will be applied and how will the city determine that the recipients meet those criteria? The following questions are also raised in respect to the arts relief grants. Given that a requirement to obtain an arts relief grant is an ABN, which in turn qualifies the artist to apply for JobKeeper payments, if they demonstrate a loss of income due to COVID restrictions, will the city only be providing grants to artists who are not already receiving JobKeeper payments, or will people receiving JobKeeper payments also be eligible? Question 6, will the city only consider artists who have had an ABN prior to 25th of May? Question 7, if the answer to that is no, does the city consider that people requesting a grant but who previously did not have an ABN to be genuine artists who relied on their art to provide an income? Through you, Mayor Cole, that concludes the public questions.
Thank you, Manager. We do have item 7.3, Leederville Gardens Trust Fund item this evening, so we can go to some of those questions. And just noting that we're not dealing with arts relief grants this evening, so we can take that question on notice and provide a response in the agenda papers for next week's meeting. Okay, so with there being no further public questions, I will go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've received no declarations of interest for the meeting this evening.
Thank you. I'll just check in with council members. Any last minute declarations? No, thank you. Okay, and next items, applications for leave of absence. Item 5, any applications? No, okay. Item 6, confirmation of minutes. This is the minutes of the COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Committee of the 2nd of June 2020. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? Declare the minutes carried. That takes us to business arising. 7.1, COVID-19 weekly update. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Castle, do you have any questions or comments on the item?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no specific questions. I assume we'll be getting an update on how phase 3 is travelling in the city and what that might lead to next. But yeah, no specific questions, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gontaszewski, any specific questions before we go to the manager? Okay. Thank you. We'll go to the manager for an update. I'm just seeing if I had any specific questions that you might be able to weave into that. Oh, I did want to ask about Beatty Park in terms of the areas, whether we could be considered to have more than 3 areas in terms of calculating numbers, or whether the 3 areas that we had in operation under phase 2 are the sort of the limitation in terms of access, etc. That was specific. And just the pathway towards reopening on the weekends at Beatty Park. I know that's talking about Saturday from till 2 p.m. If there's any idea of the time frame for reopening to previous COVID hours. Thank you, Manager.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can answer the question regarding the person limits at Beatty Park. So they actually have more than 3 zones. They've got about 6 zones, including group fitness classes and the pool areas. The rules allow them to have a 300-person limit, but they can't have more than 100 in any one zone at any particular time. We have the ability to be able to apply for an exemption for Beatty Park to have more than 300 people in the entire venue. We're considering that. The challenge is that there's no exemption to be able to have more than 100 people in one particular area. And as we know, there's very large areas at Beatty Park, which really is the challenge, and that's where we would more likely to be wanting to seek an exemption. But they are operating quite well within the limits at the moment. I'll leave it to the Executive Director to answer the question about weekend hours.
Thank you, Manager. We'll go to the Director.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, at this stage, as you noted, Beatty Park, with those restrictions, is open on Saturdays between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. And the team doesn't envisage opening for longer hours until we have a larger number of people coming through. So the COVID restrictions, at the moment, there is a threshold in terms of both numbers of people coming through, and then also the I suppose the cost effectiveness of that. Obviously, when we start to have labour coming in on the weekends, it becomes a lot more expensive. So there is a bit of a balancing act going on there at the moment. So in order to increase our hours on the weekend, we really are putting our efforts into that exemption process to try and increase our numbers, which will then make it viable.
Thank you, Director. Councillors, any other questions of the Manager for built form and wellbeing? Okay. Also, I just wanted to comment, it was interesting that to note in the report on page 7 that the city's going to be participating in this initiative from the local government department and local government professionals to measure resilience in the community, which is going to be, I think, an interesting measure through this time and something that will help inform policy development potentially within the City of Vincent. I know that's something that Councillor Loden has previously expressed an interest in measuring when we've undertaken surveys before, so that seemed like a good opportunity to participate in, and I note that they're going to use that data for both state and local governments, so that's good to be part of that. I don't have any further questions on this item this week, so I'll put it, all those in favour, and declare it carried. Second item for this evening is 7.2. Financial assistance recommendations for City Tenants, Subiaco Football Club. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. No, I don't have anything to, any additional questions, but just to note that I think that we are going to see further requests coming in, and then also we're going to be dealing with a number of these going forward. As we talk about resilience, we've also got to consider resilience in our community organisations. And I don't see, despite the fact that we have seen some return to training, life isn't back to normal. And so I'm pleased that we've got this methodology for considering these requests. I just think we're going to see more of them coming forward. So I'm supportive of this one, and it's going to be important that we're able to continue to manage requests from our community organisations to ensure that they're viable long term, and perhaps have some strategies in place to ensure that the city is able to manage these requests.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Castle, any comments or questions?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a question. I know I've noticed this before in these reports that we state that our approach is that applications are only considered with a minimum of 50% downturn. And I'm just wondering, have we had any or many applications for relief where there's less than that in terms of downturn? Is there a group of organisations out there that are not meeting the threshold?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't received any applications where they haven't met that threshold. So all the applications we've received to date have been presented to the committee for consideration.
Okay, thank you. And I can't find it in the report now, but I'm sure I read that there was obviously quite a bit of fluctuation in the downturn from month to month for this particular applicant, and the final result was matched towards their co-tenant, being East Perth. And I just wondered if you could give us a bit more detail about how you arrived at that conclusion.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So we've looked at each month, comparing it with the previous period, and it has fluctuated. That's in the confidential attachment. So I don't know if you want me to go into more detail, but basically we've looked at over the period. We believe it was just under 70%. So we believe it's close to East Perth Football Club, which was considered by the committee in previous weeks. And we note that we will review this like we will all other tenants in June, July. So it's just a 3-month period. So if there's further downturn, we can adjust it accordingly at that time. So we do believe this amount reflects, even though their monthly amounts result in different downturns, that the average is 70%. And so that's accurate for this period.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, councillors. I do think that when we see these weekly requests coming from our clubs, it is a stark reminder that COVID has had quite a drastic impact, and that whilst we're doing well from a health perspective, the economic effects have been very significant. So yes, it's quite hard to read and through these and see these dramatic impacts on our clubs, and you do need to think about resilience and support going forward, because it could be a pretty tough recovery for some of our clubs. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. That brings us to item 7.3, Leederville Garden Incorporated Trust, COVID-19 Relief Fund recommendations, food bank and additional allocation of funds. Could I call for a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'm pleased to see this come forward. I think that in the suite of projects that have been supported by the committee, I was very keen to see some food relief be incorporated into that. I think that food stress is certainly something that vulnerable members in our community experience and will be amplified through the COVID pandemic and recovery phase. Just a question from Mr. Meyer, but also just a question of my own in terms of what will be specifics will we be able to include in our funding agreement to ensure that we're supporting City of Vincent residents through this process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can respond to that question. We have a detailed grant agreement that we both parties sign, that the city approves on, regarding the disbursement of these funds. It's a requirement that the fund recipient provides us with quarterly reports that details the acquittal, and that the acquittal reflects the conditions that are outlined in that grant agreement. It's very specifically mentioned that the distribution of funding is to individuals who are City of Vincent residents. So that's part of the acquittal process and part of the evidence that we are looking to see. Obviously, I think the only time where that would be difficult is for homeless people. Obviously, they don't have necessarily a residential address. So we will work with the providers to work out a reasonable approach there. I think at the end of the day, we're there to support the most needy in our community, and we'll try and do that in a way that's also fair to the City of Vincent more generally. Yeah, look, we've got, as I said, a fairly detailed acquittal process there. There was a question about whether or not we'll be reporting on that acquittal process and whether that will be available to residents. I think some of the nature of that acquittal process, part of it is confidential, where we're talking about individuals, but I do think it's appropriate that we report back on the general statistics of the programs that we have funded, and I'd be supportive of doing that. It would probably be towards the end of the 2020-2021 financial year, which reflects the grant funding periods as well.
Thank you, Executive Director. I think we had talked previously about having some, I guess, incorporating some level of updates through the weekly update that perhaps may provide some interim information in addition to, I guess, a more broader report at the end of the agreement period. I guess the only thing I also wanted to raise was just in terms of the food packs provided. It was brought to my attention that the provision was, I guess, for a pack of, for a family of two, or for two, and just wanted to clarify in terms of that this is something that could be support larger family groups if required.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think we would absolutely be supporting larger family groups. Once we have approval from the committee to progress, we'll go to the next level of detail in defining those specific criteria and measurables, so I can ensure that that is included in the process. And just to respond, we are getting a quarterly report from the grant recipients. So I think, as you mentioned a moment ago, we can report back on that on a quarterly basis, as well as an overall report at the end of the reporting process as well.
Thank you very much. Nothing further from me.
Thank you. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a clarification question. In the report, it states that Food Bank have requested support to cover 20% of the costs. Can you confirm, is that 20% of the costs for this service to be provided to Vincent residents, or does that reflect the fact that this program operates across Perth and the Vincent residents make up 20% of the expected delivery?
I might ask the manager to make a comment on that. My understanding is it's the 20% of the Vincent component, but can you just confirm that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's also my understanding. So that's in confidential attachment. The second attachment, we've got their breakdown of the financial assistance they're requesting and the level of support, 20% of their overall operations, which I understand is for Vincent. So basically they're funding most of the costs, they just need support for 20%, and that's the 178,000 they're requesting.
Thank you. So that's what I thought it was. I just was clarifying, so that they're funding the remaining 80% through other funding sources or existing funds. Yeah, I mean that. So in fact, the whatever that calculation is, the entire cost of this project for Vincent is, I'm not going to do that maths in my head, but if 178,000 is 20%, that represents a significant impact on Vincent residents, I think. So I'm very happy to support. I think, as Councillor Gontaszewski said, this is something we identified early as being a real need during this period, and Food Bank is an incredibly well-respected provider, so I think this is a great outcome.
Thank you, councillors. I agree with all of the comments made, and I do think that when you consider that they're saying this is a 20% contribution and that per hamper the cost is $36, of which the City of Vincent's contribution would be $7, you see that there is, this need does exist within our community based on the data that they've provided. I also just wanted to ask a question. It does talk about provision of potential provision to Arranmore Catholic College, which I just wanted to, just in terms of the definition of the trust and City of Vincent residents, and the fact that Arranmore College is a private school that does have an intake across the, quite broadly across the metropolitan area, how that might be managed.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's our understanding that that does align with the purpose that the funds can be used from the trust.
So in terms of provision of urgent relief to people in the City of Vincent, I would be quite sad to not include school children. I'm not at all advocating that. I'm just making sure that we meet the terms of the trust. And you're satisfied that that would, yes, okay, that's fine. I'm satisfied, thank you. All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Thank you. Okay, announcements by the presiding member. I don't have any announcements this evening. General business, does anyone have any general business that they wish to raise? No, okay. We haven't had any confidential items on this evening agenda. Our next meeting is on the 16th of June 2020. It does say here that we'll be dealing with COVID-19 weekly update. Do any of the directors have any ideas of any other items that may be coming forward to this meeting at this stage? I assume this will be updated through the week.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we are anticipating that we'll be able to bring the first round of Arts Fund grant proposals for the committee's approval. Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Director. That's great news. Okay, we'll look forward to that, and just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and we do have a council briefing at 6 p.m. which we'll also be live streaming this evening, so I'll declare the meeting closed at 5:34 p.m. Thank you.